Okay, so moving on to the results. So you can see some of the differences there as we looked at before. This is the front of the brain. Here on this scan, we're looking down on the head through one of the slices. These are the eyes at the front. And so you can see the frontal lobe where lots of our thinking and reasoning and what makes us human really goes on, and much less activity in the murderer's side there. So some key findings: reduced activity and increased activity. So where did we have reduced activity first of all? In areas that were previously linked to violence, the prefrontal cortex, the left angular gyrus, and the corpus callosum. So again, in terms of the exam, just learn some of these areas that had reduced, and particularly areas that were previously linked to violence in other studies. That's what the previously means. On the left side, there was reduced activity in the amygdala, thalamus, hippocampus, again previously linked to violence for the hippocampus. So increased activity in the areas not linked with violence, cerebellum. On the right side, the amygdala, thalamus, and the hippocampus. So increased activity in the right hippocampus, but decreased in the left. Now, broadly speaking, it's believed that our left side of the brain is our reasoning and our thinking. So to have less activity in the left side and more in the right means that perhaps you're being more impulsive than thoughtful. Okay. So again, make a list to learn those. It's simply that there are those differences in those areas previously linked, and some that aren't. 14 of the murderers were non-white, so this is a quick analysis between race, but there was no significance between them, no significant difference. 23 of the murderers had a history of head injury, but again, no significant difference between the non-head injury murderers, except for in their corpus callosum, and Raine accepted that this might have contributed to a reduction in the murderer's brain activity for those head injury participants. No significant difference were found for the performance on the continuous performance task or for handedness. Okay, so they all did equally well on the continuous performance task. Left-handed murderers had significantly less abnormal amygdala asymmetry than the right-handed murderers. To be honest, that's one of those findings that I probably wouldn't bother learning in terms of how you're getting this across for the exam. All three of these really aren't important. These are the important bits in terms of how they link to crime and how it might explain crime. Key finding continued. So in summary, the murders had reduced glucose metabolism, so that would indicate lower activity in areas previously linked with violence. So reduced glucose metabolism there in the prefrontal cortex, the left angular gyrus, and the corpus callosum. Abnormal asymmetries, so reduced activity on the left and greater on the right. So asymmetries is the symmetry of two brains compared left to the right. So reduced on the left and increased on the right. No differences in some areas of the brain associated with mental illness, but not with violence. So again, those areas, if you're schizophrenic compared with the other schizophrenics, there was no difference between those. But not with violence. No difference in the areas that are associated with violence. So in other words, if you were schizophrenic, you would expect some areas of the brain to have lower activity. So you, as a murderer, compared with a schizophrenic non-murderer, there was no difference in those areas associated with mental illness. So it was the kind of same abnormality that you would expect in a schizophrenic. But those areas are not associated with violence, they're just associated with schizophrenia. Okay. Possible conclusions. Murderers pleading not guilty for reasons of insanity have significant differences in the metabolism of glucose in a number of brain areas compared to non-murderers. The study identifies some specific physiological problems which may predispose some criminals. So, specific physiological processes which may predispose some criminals to violent behaviour. May. We'll come back to that word. Reduced activity in the prefrontal, parietal and callosal regions of the brain, so less activity in those areas, together with differences between the left and right, asymmetries, in the amygdala, thalamus, medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus, may be one of the many predispositions towards violence in the NGRIs. This reduced activity in the prefrontal area may explain impulsive behaviour, a loss of self-control, evidence of immaturity, altered emotionality, inability to modify behaviour. So those differences in the prefrontal lobe might explain some of those traits of impulsivity and loss of control that murderers have. All of these may make it easier to carry out different kinds of aggressive acts because normal constraints may be reduced. So in other words, whereas we might not punch somebody in the face when they've annoyed us because we are able to have self-control, maybe it makes it easier for them to carry out those acts because their areas of the brain for self-control aren't kicking in, so they just punch them. The neural processes which underlie violent behaviour can't simply be reduced to single brain mechanisms. In other words, it seems like there's several processes involved. You can't just say that one area. We can't identify a particular area. It's an interacting bunch of factors. The results do not show that violent behaviour is determined by biology alone. So this is where the disclaimers come in. They can't use this as excuses for their crime. There are a number of other factors which must be taken into account: social, situational, psychological predispositions, learned responses are bound to play a part, and perhaps the physiological elements may only produce predispositions to extreme forms of violent behaviour. One should therefore be cautious about attributing the reason why individuals commit murder simply to the fact they have mental disorders. So Raine is being very cautious here and continues to be cautious. The results do not show that murderers pleading NGRI are not responsible, nor that PET scans can be used as a way of essentially diagnosing violent individuals. They do not show that brain dysfunction causes violence. They do not show that all violent offenders have such brain dysfunctions. They can only draw conclusions about this kind of violent behaviours, i.e. murderers pleading not guilty for reasons of insanity. So not for necessarily domestic abuse or GBH or things like that. It's just for these. Violence cannot be explained by the results. The results relate merely to the criminal behaviour of individuals who commit murder and then plead not guilty for reasons of insanity. Think back to who is being referred here. Just those who had some case to be classed as insane. Quick look at the exam. 2017 exam, using the research by Raine, outline how criminal behaviour can be explained through physiological factors. So what you want to do is, you've only got about 11 to 12 minutes to write this. So go back, there's a lot of writing there, and time yourself for 11 minutes. Can you use a mix of the aim and the method and the procedure, and can you then link it to the results in terms of the physiological differences, the physiological factors, and how that links generally to biology impacting criminality? Okay, I would time myself and try and produce myself a model answer for that question, because in reality that is how the question would look if it were to come up again. Thanks for listening.